I left home for Mustang Island to try to remember something that I once knew but had forgotten.
He said I left California back in '76. The music died with Jimi Hendrix, and things got crazy out in San Francisco. I was thumbing across the country, man, I thought I would freeze. So I followed Buffett to the Florida Keys, where I nearly got busted with a load of snow white cargo. Yeah, I did. But I picked up this boat in an illegal deal. Now you could say I got a hell of a steal, but I couldn't stay there, so I headed for Islamabad. Oh, but as a sea captain, man, I ain't worth a damn. And out in the ocean, I got all turned around, and I limped into Bolivar with a hole in my hull. But I said if I ain't sinking, well, I must be swimming. If I ain't dead, hell, I must be living. And living is the thing that scares me the most. And if I ain't sleeping, well, I'm usually fishing. If I ain't anchored, I will be drifting. All in all, I think I'm doing pretty good since I hit my third coast.
I awoke at sunrise on the first day to nothing but the sound of lapping waves, and no smells save for the sand, the salt spray, and the dwindling campfire from the night before. I had first camped out on Mustang Island alone in the summer of 2022, before any of the internet fame, before I had made hardly any TikTok videos at all, before I had seen the world and learned so much about myself. Mustang Island had been the place where I had first began to wonder who I was and what I had wanted from life. All those years ago, I had sought refuge from myself. I had been working my day job for 50, sometimes 60 hours a week, out in the hot sun, and absolutely running myself into the ground. It had been the countless hours that I had spent here in solitude, underneath the moon, fishing for sharks, drinking rum, and listening to the lapping sounds of the waves. It was here that great Saturday night storm rolled over the beaches, nearly washing me and my Jeep away, that finally gave way into a cathedral, a church of one underneath that beautiful, wide-open, horizonless expanse that only seemed to grow on as my imagination searched the back of it. I sought to rediscover that unknowable thing, that lesson that I had taken originally from Mustang Island and then lost somewhere on the other side of the earth. Unlike my first visit here, this time I would be bringing company. My companion was Jenna Tonic. 8 months earlier, Jen had been in a terrible car accident, which had left her with a broken pelvis, sternum, and wrist. As a performing artist, Jen had not only been temporarily robbed of her livelihood, but her confidence as well. She'd only recently begun walking unassisted, and we celebrated that newfound freedom on the beach that morning. The morning's tide had left us with a bounty of treasures, both natural and man-made. It was only a few hours later, as our Jeep began to slog through the sand the 12 or so miles back towards Port Aransas, that I had realized our gas mileage was a lot worse off in these conditions than I'd expected. It was only after that last nail-biting mile or so, as we coasted back across and finally found the refuge of a gas station, that I realized my 20-gallon tank had been running on fumes. We refueled completely after nearly being stranded on the way back to Padre, but the next step would be to resupply, to find the things that you always seem to forget when traveling. It was still just past dawnbreak on that Saturday morning, and even though the fishermen had already been on the waves for hours, the beach tourists had not yet rolled in for the day. So our first stop would be at the Walmart on Padre Island, which is unlike any other Walmart that I have ever seen in the United States. In addition to the usual clothes and groceries, the entire middle third of this store is occupied by nothing but rafts, sunscreen, and sandals. Our next stop was going to be finding somewhere to eat, and since it was still early in the morning, we got lucky enough to find 2 seats at the bar at Ridley's. And of course, we had to start the most important meal of the day off with a couple of espresso martinis paired with some delicious French toast and just about the best biscuits and gravy I've ever eaten in my entire life. And as the old saying goes, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning. From there, we headed north, up Mustang Island and into the thriving metropolis of Port Aransas, Texas. Population about 3,500, give or take. Our first stop here before the heat of the day set in was the Liana Bell Turnbull Birding Center, overlooking Salt Island. Even with a little bit of cheeky graffiti aside, this place is known for featuring over 100 species of observable birds, including rails, grebes, frigates, spoonbills, shorebirds, even flamingos make their temporary homes on Salt Island. And as an animal lover, there was no way I was going to miss out on this awesome opportunity. And sure enough, the name lived up 10 times over. We saw more ducks, gulls, ibises, herons, egrets than you could shake a stick at. I'm well known in both my social circles and by my viewers here that I am a man of culture by day and an absolute hooligan at night. However, I was told that if I returned here at night, there was a pretty good chance that I could see some alligators. And that was just about the only piece of information that could have kept me away from the Port Aransas nightlife, at least for an extra hour or two. As the heat of the day began to roll in, we quickly began to notice that the Memorial Day travelers were coming in full force. There was not a single unoccupied parking spot in all of the Port Aransas beach. Unlike our cozy bit of solitude, about 10 miles down the shore on North Padre Island, this beach was completely packed. Trucks, loudspeakers, kites, flags, picnic blankets, tarps, gazebos, as far as the eye could see. It was a gigantic, somewhat family-friendly party that stretched as far as we could see. Though not our preferred scene, and far from the goal of trying to discover a bit of solitude next to the ocean, we nevertheless wanted to stop in and see what the fuss was all about. Even by 10:30 in the morning, the sun had begun to broil everything underneath it, and that ocean began to look very cool and inviting. The tide was coming in with a fury and managing to knock down every tourist and sandcastle in its path. And even despite being swept off our feet, literally, we still managed to make a new friend. In the midst of the chaos, both in the turbulent, churning sea and the ocean of tourists around us, there was a single hermit crab. After a moment of hesitation, he was more than happy to crawl out and explore us just as much as we began to explore him. It was in that moment that I began to feel a bit of kinship with the small creature. A small, insignificant creature who lived in a universe so vast that its purpose would never be understood by any of the things living within it. And on this day, he had been plucked from it and brought into a world of complete chaos, surrounded by countless alien creatures who themselves would be living countless lives. These two creatures, whose time intersects for just a moment, neither being able to comprehend what the other's life could possibly entail. So after excusing ourselves from that brief existential crisis, we needed some bait and a couple of Jell-O shots. Thankfully, Beach Bum sold both. We chased those down with a couple of cold Lone Stars from the cooler, swapped them out with some fresh cut mullet, and proceeded to the north end of Port Aransas to check out one of their beautiful fishing piers. Throughout the years, I've spent many hours sitting on piers and jetties and beaches, watching the giant freighters come in and out, watching those ships on the last legs of their journeys, coming from half the world away. Before I could even think about wetting a line, I found myself leaning over the side of the Port Street Pier, watching those giant ships come in over Aransas Pass and into Corpus Christi Bay, watching pods of dolphins pitch and dive right in front of the keels, inches away from death, and yet so sure of their own abilities that they never missed a beat. This beautiful convergence of industry and nature in a rare moment of working and harmonious beauty. These were the great-great-grandchildren of the ships that I wrote about in my own novel. These were the dreams that I'd had as I'd spent hundreds of hours sitting in front of my own words, imagining those voyages of the past and wondering how similar they might have been to the ones that we have today. As we began setting up our gear and cracking open another couple Lone Stars, we noticed that just to the left of us were some pretty serious fishermen. He was part of Team Hammy, and not long after we arrived, he felt a big tug on one of his lines. These guys are well-known and very talented shark fishermen. Our first question was, could it be a blacktip, a bull shark, even a hammerhead? My own tackle was set aside, and I was quickly enlisted to help out with the remainder of the poles, while he pulled in whatever this monstrosity was going to be. A small crowd quickly began to assemble. The excitement was palpable. All of us knew that we were about to witness something remarkable. The line began to heave. He dug in his heels and set them back against the side of the pier. Whatever this thing was, it was going to be massive. He instructed someone to grab a lasso from his gear. Whatever this thing was, as soon as it breached the surface, he was going to rope it like a stray calf. And then, after 20 minutes of pure struggle, it finally came to the surface. What we all thought to be a 200-pound shark was actually one of its closest living relatives. It was an adult southern stingray, well-grown with nearly a 4-foot wingspan. She was missing her tail barb, but no less upset about being hooked. A fun fact about southern stingrays is that the males will typically only grow to be a foot or two wide, where the females will grow to nearly be the size of a person. What would now entail would be the very harrowing and delicate task of climbing down the side of the pier to extract the hook from the side of the stingray's wing. After several minutes, we were finally able to get the creature just in close enough that she could be set free once again. I like to think that she's still out there, right now, watching this video and realizing she's now one of the most famous stingrays on the entire internet. After bidding farewell to our new friend, it was time to head over towards the gaff, because we knew at 4 o'clock would be the legendary belt sander races. The gaff is a classic-style beach dive bar, and the sign says it all, beer and pizza. And if there's two things that this bar does well, it's beer and pizza. We arrived early. After a long day of walking around the beach and fishing for stingrays, we were more than ready to soak up a bit of atmosphere from the bar as well as some air conditioning. It was well into the afternoon, and by this point the sun had truly begun to swelter. The heat of the day had finally began to take its toll. We needed a water break before our next round of daiquiris. We knew, however, that in just a few more minutes we would be returning outside because the belt sander races were about to begin. If you are somehow unable to grasp the concept of how powered home improvement tools could somehow be used in competitive racing, I will now allow the following footage to speak for itself. It's always, I never see you at the club. Oh, I never see you at the belt sander races.
You got it, lane number 1, safety back, going up against the wood pitcher.
We took our Gaff's Pizza to go, shying away from the giant crowds and the hustle and bustle of competitive belt sander racing, and instead opting to take a little rest in the air conditioning of the Jeep. We took the opportunity to rehydrate, carb up, and enjoy the beautiful views, watching the ships come in out of the bay, the yachts, the touring boats, the commercial fishing ships, and the charters alike. As we approached the 6 o'clock hour, the majority of the tourists had begun to disperse for the day. Save for a few die-hard party animals, it was incredibly hot and just about everybody in Port Aransas was just about done for the day. It was our opportunity to finally stretch our legs and explore the city a bit. There's a certain charm in a town like Port Aransas, a place that is just big enough to draw in the tourists, but small enough to retain all of its kitschy charm, shark tunnel and all. A place with a whole lot of tourist traps, but never in a way that feels exploitative. The natural beauty of the seaside hamlet was dotted with small businesses and amazing food. Despite the temptation, Port Aransas still feels like a town that is unspoiled by exploitation. Perfectly nestled on the Texas coastline, a spot that is not a destination for out-of-staters, but the ideal location for someone that is just close enough looking for an escape. The perfect spot for fishing, sun, and for me, lots of opportunities for photography. As if out of a mirage, pirates appeared right as the sun began to set over the Corpus Christi Bay. The evening was rolling in, the air began to cool, and the beach had become nearly empty. And as evening began to take hold, like a werewolf, I began to feel the transformation from a gentleman of culture into an absolute hooligan. We were going to have a couple of few more and go look for some alligators. It was nearly dark by the time we returned to Charlie's pasture near Salt Island, a place that we had been not 12 hours earlier. The views from the salt marsh piers and lookout towers were ideal, the perfect place to view our first sunset on Mustang Island. One of America's most unsung triumphs are its preserved natural green spaces. Throughout the country, these beautiful places offer a free or inexpensive way for anyone to reconnect with nature. These truly unspoiled dreams of great visionaries like Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir endure, despite any other conflicts, any other political discourse in the United States. These places remain, and should, for the rest of our nation's existence. To anyone visiting the United States, either as a tourist from abroad or someone simply exploring their own backyard, odds are there is a space like this, probably miles from where you currently are. All of them are teeming with flora and fauna alike, a place to truly understand the space that you live in, the spaces it once looked before humanity's creep encroached upon it. Vast, quiet, unbroken places, the kind of spaces where a person can truly sit and imagine the world as it once was. The kind of places where one could imagine the world might return after humanity has long since left the earth. And as the birds began to roost, quieting their daily songs, a new music began to arise, a certain nocturnal rhythm of insects and raccoons, possums and skunks, that momentary transitional silence as the shifts began to change, those that slept and those that awoke. And as the world became bathed in moonlight and the sun was replaced with the soft, false glow of the town of Port Aransas, we were going hunting for alligators. final stop of civilization for the day would be the Shipyard, located in historic, although not very large, downtown Port Aransas, Texas, easily the largest building there. There were cars parked around the block of this 3-story monolith. It was a venue that reminded me a bit too much of Austin, a place with open seating, good, inexpensive food, and lots of cold drinks. We parked down the street and made our way through the crowds, ordered a couple of frozen drinks, and walked up the stairs to enjoy panoramic views of the entire town as well as the surrounding area. It was crowded and loud, with a pretty raucous party atmosphere. The band was great, playing a lot of cover songs, mostly Texas country, my favorite genre. However, something felt a bit missing. It was no fault to the venue itself, but as we seated ourselves amongst the hordes, listening to the music over the loudspeaker, being elbow to elbow with our fellow, very sweaty man, we realized this wasn't the reason that we'd come here. While neither me nor Jen are any stranger to a party, looking around, we realized that we had come here as a way to reconnect with nature, to sit next to the beach, to enjoy the quiet, to listen to the lapping of the waves, to feel our toes in the sand. Though we had spent the entire day surrounded by tons of people, we realized that our greatest wish at this moment was to be alone, together, yet quiet. There were so many more miles ahead of us, both improvised and man-made. There was still so much nature to enjoy, so much history to witness, and so many more animals to make friends with. So after we finished those 2 solitary drinks, we closed our tab and drove the 20 miles or so back to our campsite, that isolated stretch of sand away from anyone else, any artificial light that wasn't our own. The remainder of that evening, bathed in the soft light of the moon and countless stars and our own fire, was more enriching than any evening in a bar could have ever given us, and the sounds of the waves put us both to sleep. We slept late that morning, only awoken by the sun's rays, whose light reflected the heat into the inside of our tent. The sun had well broken the horizon, and our campfire from the night before had well become a memory several hours earlier. The beach was becoming more clear of its campers, and now all that remained of their presence were a few scant tire tracks that had yet to be swallowed up by the ocean and the wind. Today's trip would begin on North Padre Island, where we would be stopping at one of the local fishing piers to see what we could catch. Driving through Padre that Sunday morning, I would have believed that the island had nearly cleared itself out from any visitors, if not for their husks, the cars that remained next to the fishing piers. Any visitors that remained on this Sunday morning were already far offshore, having left the mainland in the pre-dawn hours while we still slept next to that dwindling campfire. Without the funding for a boat or the self-discipline to be up that early, we instead opted to fish the old-fashioned way, the poor man's way, off the side of the dock. We hauled our gear to the far end. Jen was in charge of food, and I with rigging up the poles. She had never been offshore fishing before. Turns out, wasn't going to take that long. It was only a few properly rigged poles and a couple of sunk Lone Stars later, we were already pulling in little catfish, mullet, striper, right off the dock. What most non-fishermen seem to misunderstand about the act of fishing is that fishing itself has very little to do with actually catching fish. Fishing itself is simply a canvas in which one can paint their own personal experience, communing with nature, sitting in quiet contemplation, enjoying the smells, sights, sounds of the ocean. Fishing can also be one of the most engaging and intimate couple or group activities a person could possibly take part in. While the hands are engaged in the simple yet deliberate act of casting a line, waiting for that nibble, the mind is free to engage with itself or others. I personally love fishing and find it to be one of life's greatest simple joys. Whether sitting on a boat or merely on the shore, over the open ocean or a pond behind your house. My greatest fishing stories rarely involve a fish. The true reward of the experience are those memories that are made and shared and recounted and recollected countless times with each journey out to the water. On these quiet journeys, I've learned far more about myself and those around me than years of therapy or decades in a church could have ever hoped to teach me. These same experiences, this knowledge of both skill and humanity, passed down through the generations since man first began to cast nets into the open sea, retrieving nourishment from those depths for both his body and soul. My poetic waxing began to fade as the tequila wore off. We packed our gear under the unrelenting sun of that late morning lunch hour, and as delicious as homemade guacamole and 3 or 4 or 5 Lone Stars can be, we knew we needed some real food. Any veteran of North Padre Island knows that there is no substitution for the legendary docks. That's DOC', not docks like where you park the boat. Although admittedly the spelling is pretty clever. Just a hop, skip, and a jump across the bridge and we were there, Snoopy's Pier, just across the way from where we had been fishing. And just as we arrived, the restaurant had first opened. Despite its more laid-back, casual, island atmosphere, the Docks menu would easily be the most sophisticated dining that we would do on our entire trip. Though I am a proponent of frugal travel spending, I also believe that any good trip can and should be accentuated by one amazing splurge, budget permitting. And though Docks could easily be accused of having a lot more sizzle than steak, after all, the views here are amazing and the atmosphere is incredibly charming, quaint even. It was truly the fare here, the food and the drinks, that easily made the price tag worthwhile. As a self-proclaimed expert on matters of liqueurs and finely poured spirits and cocktails, I naturally ordered my drink out of a bucket. Tabasco, even saltines. A truly good oyster, in my opinion, can be dabbled out with a fork and sucked out raw. The main course would be a catch of the day redfish and a crab stuffed flounder, both topped with a crawfish cream sauce. It was so good it made our mouths hurt. We swapped the dishes back and forth, cooled ourselves under the giant ceiling fans, and prepared our itinerary for the rest of our day in Corpus Christi. Just across the bridge, back onto the mainland, and yet somehow seeming so far away from that sleepy Sunday morning Padre Island, was the metropolitan city of Corpus Christi, Texas. Often overlooked when compared to larger cities such as Houston, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and even El Paso, the Corpus Christi metropolitan area actually contains more people than the entire nation of Iceland. The city is home to hundreds of businesses, both large and small, a university, museums, and one of the top aquariums in the country. Covering over 7 acres of land right next to the ocean, the Texas State Aquarium is home to over 4,000 different individual animals representing more than 300 different species, both marine and freshwater. Jen and I spent the remainder of that early afternoon visiting every single stingray touch tank, witnessing the dolphin shows, looking at the beautiful jellyfish. Large open spaces, deep tanks, and vast atriums gave the appearance of a public park. There was the usual aquarium fare, reefs and marine fish, clownfish, anemones, and giant sea sponges, alligators, ibises, stingrays, and sea turtles. The exhibit that truly stood out at this aquarium was the sunken ship. First opened in 2017, this 400,000-gallon tank features sandbar sharks, stingrays, hogfish, gigantic grouper, moray eels, and barracuda. The exhibit can be viewed from 3 separate levels, but on the bottom is a 68-foot-long shark tunnel. It was only now, as they swam mere inches from my face, I wondered, had there been sharks like this in the dark ocean the night before? How close had I ever been in my life, unbeknownst, swimming next to these potentially dangerous, yet nearly always docile creatures. And though the shark tunnel could only be viewed from below, one structure that could be seen from any point in the aquarium was the gigantic Spanish galleon, recreated and placed within the center of the exhibit. This structure, appearing as it actually would in the Caribbean Sea, was home to many moray eels, a species so mysterious we don't even know how they mate. Traditionally adult activities. The idea of the exclusively adult vacation often conjures images of lonely, slow beach days. And while these sorts of activities can offer an escape from the responsibilities and drudgeries of adulthood, they can often fruity drinks in a tiki bar, or even hours spent in a spa, even childish spirit within them. That innate curiosity that drives us to travel itself, an urge to learn and explore the world around us. If there's any lesson to be taken from my videos, it is to never lose that sense of adventure, that need for exploration, that desire to discover what has yet to be known. When traveling, make sure to set aside time to experience something that not only have you never experienced before, but perhaps you would never be able to experience anywhere else on planet Earth. The stories you earn, the experiences you gain, will last far longer than any trinket bought. The knowledge you gain is capable of shaping your very perception of the world itself. One day the souvenirs will become lost or broken. The knots in your back will tie themselves up again, but the memories that you find will never fade. It was late in the afternoon when we left the Texas State Aquarium, but just down the road would be our final stop in Corpus Christi for the day. Parked just down the way from the aquarium is one of the largest, coolest sights on the entire Texas coast. It's the classic Blue Ghost, the USS Lexington. There was no way that me and Jen were going to miss it. Originally commissioned for World War II, the Japanese military actually claimed that they'd sunk her 4 different times. They sent out press releases, they threw parties, the whole deal. But every time that they thought she was gone, she popped right back up like a bad penny. She was still whooping ass and taking names, and that's how she earned the nickname, the Blue Ghost. Now, she's long since been retired, but they've turned the entire ship into a museum that you can walk freely through, touring at your own pace. You can walk through the engine rooms, see the bunks where the sailors used to sleep, check out all of the old fighter planes up on top of the deck, and they even have a simulator that, by the way, I was pretty terrible at. And according to legend, this place is haunted as hell. A bunch of folks say they've actually seen ghost sailors, heard footsteps at night, and doors opening and closing on their own. Now, I personally didn't see a ghost, but I was walking a little bit uneasy. I have long since been a fan of nautical literature, everything from Horatio Hornblower all the way up through The Hunt for Red October. I've spent countless hours poring over pages, reading about the HMS Wager and its ill-fated, mutinous crew. I've often wondered what Ernest Shackleton might have felt on his various voyages down to the bottom of the earth, sailing to Antarctica on technology that most people wouldn't even take out on a lake these days. Tales of the Sea have enraptured me since I was a child, and so when it came time to write my own novel, Harangi Fire, there was no way its setting was going to be anywhere else except on the open sea during a long, adventurous voyage. And so, seeing this magnificent ship in person, wondering what the crews must have felt, less a boat and more of a floating city, all of these parts working together like gears in some giant machine. Each of the crew working in harmony, building and operating something far grander than themselves. I explored every square inch of this vessel and at times stood in awe of what must have happened aboard the USS Lexington. It was equal parts history lesson, haunted house, and playground, and I am so grateful that I was able to explore this ship. It was a 30-minute drive from the shores of Corpus Christi back down to our campsite on North Padre Island. Unlike our previous day in Port Aransas, tonight would be spent far away from the bars, nightclubs, loud music, and overpriced drinks. Instead, we had one more late afternoon driving past the bridges, the palm trees, the beautiful sands that were almost completely devoid of any travelers except for us. Only a few lingering fishermen and kiteboarders remained, beyond the paved roads and out onto the sand. For one last time, that evening, the beach would be ours. One last evening of quiet contemplation, only interrupted by the fellowship of the earth and the animals around us, and with each other. One last sunset walk on the beach, one last hunt for shells, one last deep whiff of the ocean breeze, feeling the spray against our faces. And then we built a campfire. I have no problem sleeping outside, but when it comes to building a fire, I'm about the furthest thing away from a YouTube survival guy. So with a generous helping of lighter fluid, a couple of starter logs, and several free copies of the Port Aransas South Jetty, we were ready to roll. We quickly realized, however, that the firewood that we'd brought along was not going to be adequate enough to stay lit for the entire evening. Thankfully, my Boy Scout instincts kicked in, and I managed to find an incredibly hefty piece of driftwood from across the beach. And from there, it was nothing but pure bliss. The sounds and smells of crackling wood against the lapping waves of the ocean. Not another man-made light to be seen. Contemplations and conversations bathed in the glow of a billion stars, far more than you'll ever see in the city nights. That primordial itch that can only be scratched in the glow of firelight, miles away from the nearest cell tower. It was there in that evening that I rediscovered my purpose. I remembered why I traveled the earth. I remembered the simple beauty of fleeting existence. And that small spark of Promethean creation began to roar somewhere from deep within my soul. We arose with the sun on that final Monday morning. The air was cool, and as we stood in that dawn light, we became very aware of how the elements, sleeping outside for 3 days, had taken its toll on our bodies. The two of us smelled like a pair of feet. But our skin had also grown harder, more tough. Our hair had begun to lighten and grow more curly with the salt. Our senses had become less dulled by artificial sounds and screens. We both felt more harmony with the world around us, more alive inside of our own bodies than we had in the weeks before. And even as we loaded our scant gear back into the Jeep, and even as we passed those few scant pilgrims who, like us, had remained through the entire weekend, even as we retraced the roads back to the world in which we had left, this trip had remained with us. Even as we stole those last few glances at the Texas coast, and returned back into the cities of man, and drank coffee and took our showers, it was not only the things that we took with us, the memories and experiences, the shells and the souvenirs, but also the things that we'd left behind, the constructed inequities of self-doubt, those notions of inadequacy, those self-imposed standards which had seemed so vital to our survival, had been left behind on the beaches of Padre Island, left there to be washed away by the ocean and lost forever in that infinite, unknowable abyss.
'Cause see, if you ain't sinking, well, you're swimming. If you ain't dead, buddy, you're living. And living is the thing that better scare you the most. And if you ain't sleeping, well, hell, let's go fishing. If you ain't anchored, you will be drifting. But all in all, you'll be doing pretty good when you find your third coast. Yeah, it's out there. Keep looking till you find your third coast.